The future's right here in front of your eyes. The world's changing right now's the time. You're all welcome, take a seat, come inside. Let Shino help you open up your mind. Free thinkers.
Factor number one, our extreme sense of humanity and concern. African people are the ultimate humanitarians because we are the first people and we are the most spiritual. So we have a history of treating people the way that we want to be treated. We don't care what color you are. You are a human being. We're going to treat you the way that we want to be treated. That's part of our spiritual foundation. Unfortunately, we were very politically uneducated about the European because our contact with him, although it did exist, our education and understanding of them was very limited. And so as a result of that, we succumbed to the brutality, the lack of humanity, the savagery, and the ruthlessness of European culture.
Okay, but even though we are bigger in stature, mind capabilities, how could it be for over, you're talking centuries of this, hundreds and hundreds of years of being that we're the superior beings on this planet? I don't really like to say race, but the superior beings on this planet. How is it possible that the same one fight is still going on in 2023?
Which takes me to my second point that I did not answer with the first question. And that is the white man's development and sophisticated use of military technology and weaponry. The gun, the precursor to the modern gun, gave the European a decided advantage when it came to warfare with African people. We invented gunpowder, but because African people do not come from a psychology of ruthlessness, right, we never thought about mass extermination. We never thought about weapons of mass destruction. So although the European got gunpowder from us, he was working on perfecting a military technique that would allow him to travel the world and lay other cultures victim to his own. We don't think like that. We believe in a world of abundance. The European operates in a world of lack. So it's not just that he showed up in Africa, he showed up with a military advantage known as the gun. And we did fight back. We have to be very clear. It was not easy for the Caucasian to take the continent. The Zulu Wars lasted almost a century. The Ashanti Wars lasted almost a century. You had kingdoms all throughout Africa that resisted the white man, and with some success. The problem, again, though, lie in the technology of the Caucasian. See, once he started stealing us into slavery, he was able to study the culture, study the land, manipulate through his use of technology. By the time we woke up and realized that American slavery was not the same as African slavery, we began to push back. The problem is his military technology had already advanced to a certain point. He had already made dirty deals with certain African kingdoms, and he was almost at a point of no return. So the original sin was that we were too humane to our visitors. That was the original sin, and we still are too humane to our visitors. Now, I just gave you the first century, if you would, of the white man's incursion into Africa through slavery.
Well, can you stay right there for 1 second? How did they get the dirty deals with the African kingdoms?
Because they came in as friends or businessmen who simply wanted a product, human capital, for the trinkets that they were trading. The problem is, when you say slavery in Africa, remember, there is no precursor in Africa to chattel slavery. In Africa, we had slavery, but slavery in Africa could almost be likened to a form of indentured servitude. So what I mean to say by that, in Africa, slave has rights. In Africa, slaves often live amongst the family, and if they are family. Slavery in Africa was never perpetual. You didn't own the entire bloodline of a people, only that individual, and only until their debt was paid. Meaning, slavery was largely a result of crime or war. You were a prisoner of war, or you were enslaved for a period of time due to a crime. In other words, African slavery always had an expiration date, did not require the dehumanization of the slave, did not strip them of their rights, and was not perpetual. So we didn't understand the white man's slavery. But again, once we found out, we began to push back. It was the technology with the military technology of the Caucasian that ultimately gave him the advantage.
Okay, so we can safely debunk the fact that slavery, the origin of it, the entrepreneurship of it came from Africa?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Absolutely not. Now, a minute ago I was saying I've given you basically the first century of contact.
Yes.
So then you say, well, it's been 400 years. We still down now. Africa, Europe, Caribbean, Central South America. Why are black people still under it? Because for the past 300 years, he's been controlling us through autopilot, remote control, through the subconscious, the conditioning. If I condition one generation of black people, just one, I'll probably rule them forever if they never do anything differently to free their mind. Do you follow?
Yes.
That's one generation. If I condition you, I can probably condition all of your descendants. We're not talking about one generation of conditioning. We're talking about 4 centuries of conditioning. The average black child born into the world believes white people are superior. Why? Through conditioning. Their parents hand down the inferiority complex. Everything from white Jesus to the snow bunny crisis, to feeling you gotta live in a white neighborhood, to thinking white ice is better. The white man doesn't even have to directly program Negroes anymore. The black community programs its own children in the interest of white supremacy.
Right. So another point that I wanted to ask is, do you think the conversations and us as the black community and the black culture, us talking about white supremacy, do you feel like that gives it life? Do you feel like, you know, the more we say that someone's suppressing us, do we become suppressed? Or like,
Not
what
in
are
my
your thoughts
opinion.
about that? Okay.
In my opinion, you have to accurately define your reality. And the bottom line is, at present, Europeans control and dominate almost everything African. So for me, it ain't about changing the terms. For me, it's about changing the conditions. It's no different than when people used to come up to me and say, your name is Dr. Johnson. Why are you still walking around with a Caucasian name? Now, of course, I'm Ifa Tunde and have been for 12 years. But prior to that, when I got that question, do you know what my answer was? You say, why am I still wearing Johnson? Well, guess what? Marcus Garvey never changed his name. The greatest Pan-Africanist ever. The late, great Dr. Amos Wilson never changed his name. The greatest black scholar of the second half of the 20th century. I can name all kind of Pan-Africanists who never changed their last name. Is it a contradiction? No. And why? For us, we're more concerned with changing conditions than we are with changing labels. Some people would rather change the label to hide the fact they don't want to do nothing about the condition. We don't believe in surface dressing. We believe you change the structure and the nature of the issue, then you change the label. In other words, do you put icing on a cake before you bake it? You bake the cake. If it's no cake, what we pulling the icing out for? And that's one of the contradictions of cultural nationalism. Cultural nationalism also always says, let's put the dashiki on. And I love dashikis. I got hundreds of them. Love African dress. Let's do the African hair. Let's change the name. Let's celebrate Kwanzaa. That's all fine, but that's all surface dressing.
Right.
Okay? For us, the Pan-African nationalists, how many schools you owning? How many banks you owning? How many supermarkets you owning? How many jobs you creating? How much land you got? Don't bring me the Halloween costume, because until you have a structure to go along with your dress, until you have power equal to the hairstyle in the naming ceremony, then all of that is nothing but ceremony. We don't want ceremony in the Pan-African movement. We want substance.
Okay. So now we're in 2023, and again, I feel like we're still fighting this fight. Do you see a conclusion to this supremacy?
To your point, we're not losing because white people are all powerful. We're losing because black people are very neurotic and ambivalent as to whether or not we want to be a part of the American empire or whether we want to build our own. There's 4 of us here. You want out the system, you want your own. Dr. Umar don't want out the system. Of course I do, hypothetically speaking. I don't want out the system. I think we can make change through the system. So I'm not thinking about building no independent institutions. Yeah. I believe the salvation for the American African is through participation with the Caucasian. He's not sure what to think because he believes in you and he believes in me. You see how this works? So what happens to all those Africans in the community who believe in you and believe in me? They're listening to a Cornel West and they're listening to a Dr. Umar. They're listening to a Michael Eric Dyson and they're listening to a Dr. Umar. They're listening to a Roland Martin. They're listening to a Dr. Umar. If you listen to people of two competing ideologies, you may have trouble coming to your own conclusion because both arguments are good. So you don't know where to fall. And what do people do when they're not sure? They do nothing. And that's exactly why since Dr. King's assassination, April 4th, 1968, black people have done nothing because part of us want to be free, but most of us don't think it's possible. If there's one victory white people have achieved against African people in a post-Dr. King era, you know what that victory is? The belief that they are invincible. Caucasians have convinced Africans, and I would make the case it's a global phenomenon. I would make the case it's a global phenomenon. But let's just talk about those of us in the American theater. The Caucasian has convinced most of us he's invincible. So when we sit down to talk about solutions, for a lot of black people, because remember, your beliefs control your options.
Absolutely.
A lot of black people would never consider doing for self. They only consider dependence on the government. Let me give you an example. There's a lot of conversation about reparations. I support reparations. And I support reparations because we are entitled to restitution for the hell that our ancestors suffered, right?
Right.
And I support reparations because it was Pan-Africanists who gave birth to the movement, not these people you see on YouTube. Reparations is not their movement. That came from us. They're just opportunists looking to build their name and get a couple bucks off of a serious topic that I don't think they're so serious about.
Right.
But while we waiting for reparations, what about the internal reparations? I hear no conversation about internal reparations. Yeah. Yes, they owe us. But if we were to talk to our ancestors, would they not also say, y'all owe us too? Do you realize half the major problems we got, money don't fix?
Oh, yeah.
Do you realize the black male-female relationship debacle? Money don't fix that.
Right.
The way we raising our children, money don't fix that. Our love of white people, money don't fix that. Our dysfunctional, psychopathological, conspicuous consumption, money don't fix that. So while we waiting on the check from the government to start working on the problems that we got, I'll tell you why. One of the central contradictions of the Negro predicament is the fact that we don't want to take responsibility for our shortcomings, and we damn sure don't want to take responsibility for solving any of our major issues. We want the white man to do everything, and any oppressed people who wants their oppressor to play a leading role, not a supporting role,
Right.
not a periphery role. We want the white man to play a leading role in every problem we got. Yeah. Hence, let me give you this. That was okay during Reconstruction. We didn't have much. That was okay during civil rights. We didn't have much. You know what our biggest problem is? One of them? Our political and economic strategies have not kept pace with the growth of American African income. When Dr. King fought for integration, it wasn't because he wanted us to live around white folks. It was so you could get access to a better education. Sure. So you could get access to a better job. Do you see that? So you could get access to a safer way to go back and forth to work, public transportation. He didn't fight for that so you can give up on black institutions and build white ones. It was just access. But after Dr. King died, instead of access to white society for strategic reasons, we made integration a way of life. And the problem today is, guess what? We still acting like we broke. Yeah. How black people broke spending $30 billion on hair? How black people broke spending $2 billion on Air Jordan? How black people broke spending $4 billion on liquor and alcohol? You ain't broke. So if you are a $2 trillion people, which we are, the richest group of Africans in the world in terms of income, why are you using 1960 strategies when you have 21st century money?
Right.
We're not rich as individuals. As a people, we're rich. So why aren't we using our disposable income to leverage it to solve our political economic issues?
Right.
Because black people don't have enough self-love to sacrifice their resources for the greater good of the community. We care about me, myself, and I, and maybe my children.